The alarms had not even finished ringing when I was pushed into the holding chamber, my rifle still hot from the last skirmish, my hands still shaking from adrenaline. The alien ship had surrendered without a single shot fired after the first 10 minutes, which never happens. Not with the Veil, not ever. Something was wrong, and I could feel it crawling up the back of my neck like static before a storm. My name is Ezra Colton, and I have spent 6 years of my life fighting a war I never asked for, on a border that keeps moving further from anything I would call home. I stopped counting the number of alien ships I had boarded a long time ago. I stopped counting the faces too, but nothing prepared me for the one waiting in that chamber. She sat with her hands folded, calm as still water, while 3 of my squad stood around her with weapons raised. Her skin held a soft blue undertone. Her eyes were a shade of gold that did not belong to anything born on Earth, and yet there was something painfully familiar about the way she tilted her head when she looked at me, like she already knew exactly who I was. Commander Ilsa Brandt was already barking orders when I walked in. She wanted a full scan, a full report, and she wanted it 5 minutes ago. This was a Veil princess, not some low-ranking scout, and command back at the station was already losing their minds over the political weight of what we had just captured. I was told to secure her and wait for interrogation specialists. Simple enough. I had done it 100 times. I stepped closer, weapon lowered but ready, and that is when she looked straight into my eyes and spoke 4 words that made my entire body forget how to move. She said my name, not Ezra, not Colton. She said the name only my mother ever called me, a name I had not heard spoken aloud since I was 7 years old, a name that existed nowhere in any file, any database, any record that the military or anyone else could have possibly accessed. Rowdy. She called me Rowdy, the nickname my mother gave me because I never sat still as a child, the nickname that died with her the day our colony ship was attacked and everything I knew turned to ash and silence. I stood frozen, rifle slack in my hands, staring at a creature I had never met before in my life, a creature who somehow knew the most private, most buried piece of who I used to be. Commander Brandt snapped at me to move, but my legs would not listen. My squad mate Denny Ashworth grabbed my shoulder and asked if I was all right, but his voice sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. The princess never blinked. She just watched me, patient, almost gentle, like she had all the time in the universe and knew I would eventually understand. I finally forced my mouth to work and asked her how she knew that name. She simply said that she remembered me, and that the memory was old, older than the war itself. I was pulled out of the chamber before I could ask anything else. Brandt ordered a full lockdown on the situation and demanded I report directly to her office once processing was complete. I walked the corridor in a daze, the hum of the ship's engines the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. In Brandt's office, I told her everything, every word, exactly as it happened. She listened without interrupting, her jaw tight, her eyes sharp with suspicion. When I finished, she leaned back and told me it was almost certainly a manipulation tactic, something the Veil were known for, a psychological weapon meant to destabilize soldiers during interrogation. I wanted to believe her. I wanted it to be that simple. But something in my gut refused to accept it, because there was no way, no possible way, that information could exist anywhere outside my own mind, and the mind of a woman who died protecting me 23 years ago. Brandt ordered me off duty for the next 12 hours, worried I was compromised. I did not argue. I needed the time to think, to breathe, to figure out if I was losing my mind, or if something far stranger was happening aboard this ship. I could not sleep. I lay on my bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. Her golden eyes, her calm voice, the way she said rowdy like it was something precious she had carried for a very long time. Eventually I gave up trying to rest, and made my way back toward the detention block, badge in hand, telling myself I only wanted answers. The guard on duty, a quiet man named Felix Marsh, let me through without much argument once I said Brandt authorized a follow-up interview. It was a lie, but I said it with enough confidence that he did not question it. The princess was sitting exactly where I left her, restraints glowing faintly around her wrists, though she did not seem bothered by them at all. When she saw me enter, something behind her eyes softened, like she had been waiting. I asked her name first, trying to regain some control over the conversation. She told me it was Illyra Vess Sorain, though she said I could simply call her Illyra if that made things easier for me. I asked her again how she knew about Rowdy, and this time she did not hesitate to answer. She told me she was a child during the early years of contact, long before the war officially began, back when Veil scouts were sent quietly to observe human settlements from a distance, unseen and unheard, gathering information the Empire wanted before deciding whether humanity was a threat or an opportunity. She said her scouting pod had been stationed near a human colony on the edge of a system called Halden's Reach. My chest tightened immediately, because Halden's Reach was where I was born, and where I lost everything. She continued, her voice steady, almost sorrowful. She said she remembered the day the colony came under attack, though not by her own people. It was a separate faction, rogue raiders who operated outside Imperial control. The same kind of raiders humanity often blamed on the Greater Vale Empire, without understanding the difference. She said her pod watched in silence, forbidden from interfering, as the colony burned. She said she saw a boy running through the wreckage, pulling other children behind him, refusing to leave anyone behind even as the structure around them collapsed. She said that boy shouted a name over and over while he searched for his mother, and that name was the one she whispered to me hours earlier. My throat tightened so much I could barely speak. I told her that boy did not save his mother. I told her that boy watched her die anyway, buried under debris while rescue teams arrived too late. Illyra's expression shifted into something I did not expect from an alien face, something achingly close to grief. She said she knew. She said her pod recorded everything, and that the images of that day stayed with her long after she grew older, long after she became someone with enough authority to actually make choices of her own. I asked her why she was telling me this now, why any of this mattered, when we stood on opposite sides of a war neither of us had chosen. She said it mattered because that boy, the one who refused to give up even while the whole world burned around him, was the reason she began to question everything her empire told her about humanity. She said the official Vale narrative painted humans as chaotic, violent, and disposable, easy to conquer, easy to erase. But she remembered a child who fought to save others before saving himself, and that memory never fit the story she was told to believe. I sat down across from her, my legs finally giving out from exhaustion and disbelief. I asked if that was the only reason she defected, a memory of a child from decades ago. She shook her head and said it was the beginning, not the whole reason. She explained that her homeworld was fracturing from the inside, split between factions who wanted endless war, and factions who believed peace with humanity was still possible. She said she had spent years quietly building alliances with the second group, gathering evidence of corruption within the war faction, hoping to one day present it to someone who could stop the bloodshed before it consumed both our species. She said the raid on her own transport, the one that led to her capture, was not entirely an accident. She had allowed herself to be found by human forces specifically, believing that if she was going to defect, she needed to do it in a way that could not be dismissed as a trick. I asked her why choose our ship specifically, out of every vessel patrolling this sector. She said she requested this route deliberately, once she recognized my name in a public record released after a ceremony honoring soldiers from Halden's Reach. She said she never expected to actually meet me, but when she saw my face on the manifest during boarding, she knew it was not coincidence, it was closure. Something in my chest cracked open, 23 years of buried grief rushing forward all at once. I had spent so long believing my mother's death meant nothing, that it was simply another statistic in an endless war. Hearing that someone, even an alien stranger, remembered that day, remembered me, remembered the boy who refused to stop trying, broke something loose inside me that I did not know was still tangled up. I asked her what she wanted from me now. She said she wanted my help convincing Command that her intentions were genuine, because without a human advocate, she believed she would be treated as nothing more than a prisoner of war, her information dismissed, her sacrifice wasted. I told her I could not promise anything, that Brandt and the higher ranks were already suspicious, already convinced this was manipulation. She said she understood the risk, but she trusted that the boy who once refused to leave anyone behind would not leave her behind either, not after everything she just shared. I left the detention block that night carrying a weight I had not felt in years. Sleep still refused to come, but for the first time in a long while, it was not grief keeping me awake. It was purpose. The next morning I requested an emergency meeting with Brandt, knowing full well I was risking my career by pushing this further. She was not pleased to see me back so soon, especially once I admitted I had gone against orders to speak with the prisoner privately. I told her everything, every detail Illyra shared, the raid at Halden's Reach, the internal fracture within the Vale Empire, the years of quiet resistance building toward this moment. Brandt listened with narrowed eyes, arms crossed, clearly still doubtful. She asked me the obvious question, the one I had been dreading. She asked how I could be certain any of this was true, and not simply an elaborate story designed to exploit my past and manipulate my judgment. I told her I could not be completely certain. Nobody could be. But I said something felt different this time, something beyond simple tactics. I told her that manipulation usually tries to make you feel powerful, feel special, feel chosen. This did not feel like that. This felt like grief being shared, not weaponized. Brant sat quietly for a long moment, considering everything I said. She finally admitted that intelligence had already picked up chatter suggesting instability within Vale leadership, fractures that lined up almost perfectly with what Illyra described. Still, she said, chatter was not proof, and one soldier's emotional testimony was not enough to change protocol. She agreed, reluctantly, to allow a formal interrogation with proper specialists rather than immediate transfer to a black site, but only if I remained present as an observer, since Illyra had specifically requested my involvement and refused to speak candidly with anyone else. The interrogation began hours later in a secure room lined with monitoring equipment. Specialist Nora Whitfield led the questioning, calm and methodical, asking Illyra to lay out every detail of the Vale internal conflict, every name, every location, every weakness in the war faction's command structure. Illyra answered without hesitation, providing coordinates for a hidden supply network the war faction relied on. Details about a growing resistance among younger Vale officers who no longer believed conquest was worth the cost, and even information about a planned offensive against a human outpost that had not yet been made public to our side. The room grew tense as Whitfield cross-checked details against existing intelligence, and piece by piece, everything Illyra said began matching fragments already suspected but never confirmed. By the end of the session, even Whitfield's skepticism had visibly cracked. Brant pulled me aside afterward, her expression softer than I had seen in months. She said the information Illyra provided could potentially save thousands of lives if verified and acted upon quickly. She said command back at Central Station was already requesting a full transfer for further debriefing, treating this as one of the most significant defections since the war began. I asked what would happen to Illyra now. Brant said that was still being decided, but the tone of the conversation had shifted entirely. She was no longer being treated as a prisoner to be discarded, but as an asset worth protecting, which meant her safety mattered now more than ever. 3 days later, a transport arrived to take Illyra to Central Station for continued debriefing. Before she boarded, she requested one final moment with me, and surprisingly, Brant allowed it. We stood together near the transport bay, the hum of engines filling the silence between us. Illyra looked at me with an expression I had not seen from her before, something lighter, something almost hopeful. She told me she was grateful, not just for my help convincing command, but for the chance to finally set down a memory she had carried alone for over 2 decades. She said watching that colony burn as a child had haunted her more than anyone in her empire ever knew, and meeting the boy from that memory, now grown into someone capable of standing up for her, gave her closure she never expected to find. I told her I never thought I would find peace with what happened to my mother, not real peace, just quiet acceptance dressed up to look like moving on. I told her that hearing someone else remember that day, remember the boy who refused to give up, made the grief feel less like a wound and more like something survivable. She smiled then, a small, genuine expression that felt entirely human despite everything alien about her. She said war rarely allows people the chance to properly grieve, but sometimes, in the strangest ways, closure finds a path anyway. Before boarding the transport, she said my name once more, the same nickname from all those years ago, spoken softly, without the weight of interrogation or suspicion hanging over it. This time, when she said it, I did not freeze. I did not feel the ground shift beneath me. I simply nodded and let the name settle into place, no longer a ghost from my past, but a bridge connecting who I used to be with, who I had become. As the transport doors closed and the engines powered up for departure, Brant walked up beside me, watching the ship pull away from the station. She admitted quietly that she had been wrong to dismiss the situation so quickly, and that whatever came next in the war, this moment would likely be remembered as a turning point. I did not respond right away. I simply watched the transport shrink into the distance, carrying with it a piece of my past I never expected to reclaim, and a piece of hope neither of us knew we needed until it arrived. Word of Illyra's defection spread quickly through command channels over the following weeks. The intelligence she provided led to the disruption of several key supply lines used by the war faction, buying critical time for human forces along the border. Whispers began circulating that her testimony, combined with growing internal resistance among Vale officers, might finally push both sides toward negotiations neither had seriously considered before. I was reassigned shortly after, given a temporary post assisting with ongoing communication efforts between Human Command and the growing network of Vale officials seeking peace. It was strange, stepping away from active combat after years of knowing nothing else, but for the first time since losing my mother, I felt like I was fighting for something beyond survival. Months later, I received a message forwarded through diplomatic channels, short and simple, but unmistakably from Illyra. She said negotiations were progressing slower than she hoped, but steadily, and that she often thought back to the moment she finally spoke that name aloud after so many years of silence. She ended the message with a single line that stayed with me long after I read it. She said some memories are meant to haunt us until we find the courage to speak them out loud, and once spoken, they stop being wounds and start becoming bridges towards something better. I sat with that message for a long time, thinking about the boy who ran through fire searching for his mother, the soldier who spent years burying that memory beneath duty and discipline, and the man who finally allowed an old wound to become something meaningful instead of something broken. The war was far from over, and peace still felt distant, fragile, uncertain. But for the first time in years, I no longer flinched at the sound of my own forgotten name. I no longer buried the memory of that day at Halden's Reach beneath silence and denial. Instead, I carried it forward, not as a scar, but as proof that even in the middle of war, even across the vast and strange divide between two entirely different worlds, connection was still possible, understanding was still possible, and healing, however unlikely, was still possible too. And somewhere out among the stars, on a homeworld fractured by its own uncertain future, a princess who once watched a burning colony from the shadows now carried that same proof forward, hoping it would be enough to finally end a war neither of us started, but both of us were determined to help finish, together.